Good morning. Glad to see we got so many people here already to start our first roundtable of our summit. My name is George DeBakey. I'm Director of International for Atomic Learning, an educational technology company that's involved in 40 countries. I also serve on the board of the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy. That's been the major organization behind this summit. And happy to be involved with this session. There's probably a few of us in here more used to the old media as opposed to the new media. But I'm involved actually in a company that's very involved in the whole new media area. But let me kick off our session here and remind you that you're in the session, The Role of New Media in Advancing Citizen Diplomacy. We're going to have this session from now until around 11 o'clock. We're going to have a quick kind of change of a few speakers and continue on till 12:15. The first panel will discuss policy recommendations to facilitate the use of new media in citizen diplomacy. And then the second all the session reports and task force reports on them. They're also on the website. So if you had something that said you'll be getting CDs, they should arrive today that you can get either later today, tomorrow, or Friday, hopefully. I think what's exciting about this session, since President Eisenhower over 50 years ago had the first one, obviously there was no internet, cell phones, Facebook, all the social media that nowadays we can is being utilized for instant communication. And many of us are still fans, obviously, of face-to-face, building relationships. But in today's world, where we may not be able to meet people, we're now able to communicate with them via various technology. In fact, this is being webcast. I welcome and say hello to those around the world that are on today. We also have, after the second panel, if you stay in this room, but you will have to skip lunch, we're having a hookup with, I think it's 50 virtual schools around the world, and we'll be having a session with students during the lunch hour. So if you're interested in staying a while, I suggest you do that. You might still be able to get lunch. What I'd like to do at this time is, I also, for my own personal situation, I've been involved with this project for 2 years. Unfortunately, I'm leaving tonight for Abu Dhabi, an activity our company's involved in that came up 2 months ago. And if I could do it by Skyping or something else, I'd prefer if I could stay here. But anyway, I'm going to introduce our two co-chairs who will start our first panel this morning. The first gentleman is David Nassar. David is the CEO and founder of Hotspot Digital, a strategic communications firm for the digital world. He founded Hotspot because he believes that the digital environment is the most competitive communications environment the world has ever seen, and seeks to find new and innovative strategies for communicating messages that result in measurable outcomes. He has over 18 years of experience involved in strategic campaigns for issues and for candidates, and he has worked internationally, mainly in the Middle East and Africa, on elections, political parties, and with the civil society. And he's also been involved, he served as the VP, Vice President for Blue State Digital, one of the world's leading online technology and strategic firms, and the firm responsible for the Obama campaign's digital communications. Our other co-chair is Anoush Rima Tatevossian, and she is currently Director of Projects and Partnerships for mobileactive.org. This is a global network and clearinghouse on the use of mobile technology for social impact. She has experience consulting on communication and engagement strategies with various international organizations, and previously worked as the Executive Director of the Armenian Volunteer Corps, a grassroots development NGO. She has a master's degree in public diplomacy from the University of Southern California, and she, from 2010 to 2012, is a research fellow at the USC Center on Public Diplomacy at the Annenberg School, focusing on how ICTs can provide a platform for communities to participate in global civil society and dialogue. So without further ado, I welcome you to the panel and turn it over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. I'm very excited about this panel, and I'm very excited about the work that we've done over the last several months to put together a report on new media and citizen diplomacy. I hope some of you have had a chance to look at it. If you haven't, it's available on the website or in some of the materials, I think on the CDs that they're giving out. And what became clear to me over the course of, there were two main conclusions I would just point to that we drew over the course of writing the report. One was that when you look at the field of new media and citizen diplomacy, there are not so few, but there are the number of organizations that are doing this work have for the most part, thanks George, have for the most part only been around for 5 years, in some cases 3 years or 1 year. It's very difficult to find an organization that's working in the field of new media and citizen diplomacy that's been doing this for longer than 5 years. And so what that means is that all of this stuff is cutting edge. And it's very exciting and very interesting from that perspective. The other overall conclusion, which is reflected in the way we've structured this panel, is that there are both policy questions and technology questions about new media and citizen diplomacy, and policy challenges and technology challenges. And so that's the way we've structured this panel. They gave us 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and a half, I think, something like that. And I looked at that and said, first of all, that's a long time to ask people to sit through one panel. But second of all, we need to have these two separate conversations about policy and technology. So this first panel that we're going to cover now deals with some of these policy questions. And I'm very excited about the people that we have with us here today. And I'm going to do the introductions all at once so then we can just have the conversation. First, we have to my right, we have Troy. Troy, I always put your name. Etulain?
Close enough.
No, tell me.
Etulain.
Yeah. Etulain, okay. Since joining USAID's Office of Democracy and Governance Troy is the Senior Advisor for Independent Media Development at the United States Agency for International Development. Since joining USAID's Office of Democracy and Governance in 2007, Troy has focused on applying technology to support freedom of information in repressive and remote programming environments, including Somalia, Burma, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, Rwanda, and the list just goes on and on and on. And I would note, actually, Troy's joining us, just 48, 72 hours after returning from how many weeks in Africa?
3.
3 weeks. And he served as Internews Network's country director in Tajikistan from 2005 to 2007, overseeing projects ranging from founding community radio stations to training and equipping private TV stations. Troy has a master's degree in international development from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and a dual bachelor's degree in both English and international relations from Georgetown University. Sitting to Troy's right is Bob Boorstin. Bob is the Director of Public Policy in the Washington, D.C. office of Google, where his portfolio includes the company's promotion of online free expression and other geopolitical issues. Mr. Boorstin brings to Google more than 20 years' experience in national security, political communications, public opinion research, and journalism. During the Clinton administration, he served in the National Security Council and advised the Secretaries of Treasury and State. Prior to coming to Google, he established and ran the international policy programs at the Center for American Progress, a leading Washington think tank. He has advised Fortune 500 companies and some of the nation's leading advocacy groups and worked on more than a dozen political campaigns in the U.S. and abroad. Sitting to Bob's right is Elizabeth Metraux. Elizabeth joined PH International in June 2006 and has worked on numerous U.S. government-funded programs with the organization. She currently serves as the program coordinator for Youth Lab, an initiative to foster innovative leadership among teens in Turkey, Armenia, and the U.S., relying heavily on the use of new media to cross borders. She also oversees digital outreach and communication for the organization, specifically providing consultation and support for the integration of social media into new and existing programs. And sitting to her right is Ian Schuler. Ian is a leading practitioner in the use of technology to advance democracy and human rights. Ian has provided political technology consulting to over 100 civil society organizations, political parties, and government institutions in more than 30 countries. As senior manager for ICT programs at the National Democratic Institute, Ian oversaw NDI's efforts to leverage new technologies to expand political rights and has made significant contributions on the use of online and offline technologies to power political reform. And I should also say he's the founder of a new and exciting startup nonprofit called the New Rights Group. I want to take one last second before we start the conversation, to thank the members of the roundtable that helped me put together this report. Anoush, of course, you'll hear from on the next panel, is my co-chair. She's here with us today. I want to thank her very much for her contributions and engagement and support. The other members of the roundtable who deserve appreciation and recognition are Martha Bixby, Executive Director of Save Darfur, Brian Connolly, the founder of Small World News, Ashika Damodar, founder and CEO of Survivors Connect, Katie Dowd from the U.S. Department of State, Troy, who I've already introduced, Sam Graham-Felsen, new media strategist and consultant, Joelle Jackson, Senior Program Officer at the National Democratic Institute, Emily Jacoby, Co-Director of Education at Digital Democracy, Aaron Mazursky, Youth Advisor at USAID, Elizabeth, who we've already spoken about, Craig Newmark, who's with us today and you'll hear from on the panel, founder and customer service rep of Craigslist. That just slipped out, Craig, I'm sorry. Ian Schuler, founder of the New Rights Group. With that, I'm going to turn it over. Should we just go right to left? Troy, would you like to go first? Yeah.
Left to right.
Sorry, my left to right. Sorry.
All right, it's a very big pleasure to have the chance to speak here today. We have sort of guidelines for very short presentations, and we're very much looking forward to the discussion with you all and hearing your feedback. So, like David said, I work for the U.S. Agency for International Development. My particular focus for the agency is empowering media in other countries to play their role in democratizing process. I was going to say in a democracy, but in a lot of places we work, it's just not appropriate to call the country system a democracy. So that typically involves a lot of training activities, supporting training and equipping of various media outlets. I think the reason I'm sitting here today is that over the years, countries have sort of figured out how to squash the activities and the role of traditional media, of newspapers, radio stations, and TV stations. So both out of interest and out of necessity, we've turned to new media tools and the role that citizens can play using these new media tools to enable the free flow of information and ideas so that people are empowered by information and by these tools. So we do this all around the world. It's not necessarily very high profile, but we do it in the name of the values which we all sort of hold dear. Freedoms, all of the freedoms and human rights which we all respect. Just like 2 points I think I want to make before I run out of my time is that it's really important to understand that I think that because of the innovations that go on in this country in new media, and because you are here sort of as an average consumer of the online social networking tools or what you can do with your mobile phone, it actually is really important for us in a developed country on the leading edge of these tools to understand their implications for privacy and the ways in which these tools can be against those who would use them for promotion of human rights. And I think it's a really big challenge to keep abreast of all the developments in this country with technology and policy and the legal and rights implications. It's like a full-time job, to keep up with things, and it's really a big challenge that it's done in the space of the private sector, and that when we talk about youth organizations setting up a meeting in Egypt or in Iran or anywhere, some sort of phone-based news service in Afghanistan, we have to understand that while these tools make communications more efficient, I think that they also can endanger people because it's very easy to monitor the activities of somebody by their mobile phone, and so we face this as a policy and a development challenge. I think as citizen diplomats, I think that when you are abroad and you are sort of talking about these rights, I think one of the biggest challenges coming from this country in particular, as Americans, is that we come from a country that sends sort of contradicting messages about where we stand vis-a-vis privacy and freedoms when it comes to technology. And so I just want to throw those as two big issues for our consideration today.
Thanks, and good morning to everyone. This is a remarkably large and awake crowd for this hour. I was even more impressed by the size of the crowd at the plenary session prior to this. Anyway, so congratulations to you all for appearing. Happy to be here today to discuss these issues. Obviously, these are issues which go to the heart of what Google's mission is around the world. We have fancy statements about how our job is to help people access information and make information usable and helpful to people all over the world. But in this context, I thought I'd just speak for a moment about three different things that we try to do. Let me start with a couple of caveats. Caveat number one is I'm on the right panel, and that is on policy, not technology. Please don't ask me any technology questions. I have been voted the least technologically capable of all of Google's 25,000 employees. Number two is I urge us, while discussing new media, not to lose sight of traditional or quote-unquote old media. I think all too often people are so caught up with what's going on right now that they forget that in many places there's absolutely no electricity, there's absolutely no connectivity, and that things like radio can actually make a big old difference still. So to those who, like me, remember the days when people used to read newspapers, for example, I know that's a long time ago to some in this audience, or you don't even remember it. These are important things to keep in mind as we discuss the value of the new media. The final thing that I'll say is I'm sure we'll get into a discussion of social media. This is an area of great importance, and I think that the notion of people connecting across cultural borders and national borders and linguistic borders to share experiences is very important. I would, however, warn people against the use of the expression friends. Not all of these people are our friends. And the social networks, as well as Google's Gmail and many other applications that you see out there and services, are currently being invaded by any number of governments who also want to be your friends, but they want to be your friend for a bad reason. They want to stop you from communicating, and that's something that I don't think is adequately recognized. Today, more than 40 different governments are currently blocking, interfering, or otherwise screwing around with the Internet, the open Internet that's quite necessary for citizen diplomacy to take place in the way that it's supposed to take place, that is in a free and open manner. Let me just quickly talk about what the job of a corporation is in all of this. I would say three things. One is to provide a platform. That's what Google exists to do. We are not a content producer. We do not back different political causes. We are there so that people can communicate with each other. And I think that all companies have an obligation, frankly, to do that. Whether they see that obligation as one of their top priorities or not, it ends up being a primary mission if they begin to cross borders successfully. We are what in the world of psychology would be called an enabler, but in this case I hope that we're a good enabler. The second thing that we have to do as corporations is to protect our users. And I think that's something that is easy to lose sight of. You know the story of Google in China. We can discuss it further if people care to. But when it comes to citizen diplomats, the last thing that it should be ours to do is to get people in trouble. And so we attempt to do various things ranging from the way that you can use Gmail on an HTTPS, that's as technical as I'll get, manner, which is harder to decipher, shall we say, harder to break through than other email systems. so that we do that in order to protect those users of ours. We also have made commitments in this area of protection to things like the Global Network Initiative, which has the various, the very original URL, www.globalnetworkinitiative.org, which is an attempt by Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, human rights groups, socially responsible investors, and academics to come together and to write a code of conduct for how corporations should behave themselves when dealing with repressive regimes. If you're interested in the kinds of protections that we think should be applied, I advise that you go there and take a look at the principles and the guidelines that we pay attention to. Finally, our job is to promote independent voices. And when I say that, I mean money. Yes, we actually spend money in this area. We sponsor various organizations ranging from Global Voices to Freedom House and others that you may or may not be familiar with in order to give them the chance to develop both the fora and the tools that are necessary for citizens to conduct diplomacy in the way that they see fit. And with that, I will be quiet.
Thank you. Good morning. I confess, actually, when I was asked to be on the panel and got the bios of my colleagues here, I was a little apprehensive to be in the presence of such greatness. And in the first half hour of, yeah, there you go. In the first half hour of the plenary session, I think Facebook, Twitter, social networking was mentioned at least a half a dozen times. So I'm actually really excited. I know there's a lot of interest in this field, in new media, in ways that young people, or especially digital natives, are really using social networking to cross borders. I'm here representing PH International. For those of you who don't know the organization, you might know us as Project Harmony. Prior to our rebranding, which we have been known by for 25 years, since we began our work in the former Soviet Union, of course at the time, the Soviet Union. And we work in technology, education, professional development, community development, to give people the skills and the tools to improve their lives and livelihoods. In Russia alone, we've partnered with organizations and companies like Microsoft and Intel to provide over 600,000 teachers with skills, computer skills, to increase their wages, to impact change in the classroom, and get students connected. I actually thought I was the only representative from PH on the panel, but my colleague here, Troy, worked for PH in Azerbaijan, and I'll be talking a little bit about the unique situation of Azerbaijan as we're going into the discussion, because as others have noted, it's very difficult to enact programs that focus on social media when you're dealing with heavy-handed regimes. So that's one of the points that I'm going to come back to. But in terms of what I bring to this conversation, many of you are on the program side. You're doing the programs, you're out in the field, and you're the one given 200 pages of documents and told to do it. And logistically, how do you do it? How do you implement social media policies and programs on a very grassroots level, where you're having to be concerned about minors and safety and security, where you're in countries in conflict or trying to cross borders? There are some very real challenges from an implementation perspective when you begin to embrace blogging, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter, or teaching young people how to use those tools. So as we have this conversation this morning, and I really do hope that it's a conversation and you'll ask lots of questions and be involved, please, I know that it can be daunting to suddenly jump into this new field of new media. And I would just encourage you, for those of you who are on the ground, to ask questions about some of the difficult logistical challenges that come up when you are merging new and old media in programs, which Ian knows very well. So I'm going to pass the mic to him.
Ian, can I just interject for 1 second?
Yeah.
Yep.
Some of you may see me on my phone up here. I see Troy has his out. So I know some of you may think that that's rude, but we're actually doing the work. We're up here tweeting. I'm tweeting, Facebooking, letting people know what we're up to. And Martha, where's Martha? There she is back there. See, I knew she was here because of Twitter. All right, go ahead.
Thanks for having me on the panel. I'm happy to have this discussion today. I think it's going to be really good. I think probably those of you in the audience might be a little bit confused, having come into a room where you expected to find a lot of cheerleaders for new media, and so far many of the panelists have warned us about the dangers of using these sorts of tools and told us about the risks that people face and the ways you can get it wrong. And I think that is sort of a natural reaction from those of us who've been in this field, that there is I think, a very warranted enthusiasm for what technology can do and what new media can do to improve the ways that citizen diplomacy happens and improve the ways that various sectors engage internationally. But I think there is also, the phrase "wouldn't it be cool if" has launched some very fantastic initiatives, but has also launched some spectacularly bad ideas and spectacularly bad programs. And those of us who have been in the field have had the opportunity to see both sides of that. And so I'm looking forward to a conversation about how do you navigate that to give people a better sense of how do you make sure you're applying this in smart ways and but being cognizant of some of the risks. Again, I was asked to speak to the specific report recommendation on integrating new media into existing efforts. And I mean, I would say that I think a lot of that is going to happen naturally, that as programs continue to be undertaken, that the participants really will drive some sort of integration of new media, formally or informally. You'll have people who are participating in an event that's largely meant to be a face-to-face event who will want to stay in contact afterwards and will see Facebook or Twitter or other tools as a good way of doing that. Sector-specific participants or sector-specific approaches, in an area that I've been deeply involved with in promoting political practices and democratic practices in other countries, as the people that we're bringing from the West, as the campaigns in the West become more technologically involved, they're bringing more technology practices. They're bringing the practices that they're used to engaging in to the places in which to other places, and those technologies are being integrated not just into the content but also into the delivery of those exchanges. Similarly, I think this is happening in education and in other areas. So I guess the question is really, how do we accelerate that adoption, or how do we, as from a policy standpoint, try to invest in those larger, game-changing sorts of innovations that can really make a big difference? And I think that level of innovation in the area of citizen diplomacy requires many of the same things that make good innovation in other sectors, which is openness and willingness to collaborate, investing in the right people, and taking strategic risks and being willing to fail and being willing to talk about your failures. David made the point in the report, or the report makes the point, and David reinforced in his opening remarks, that the field of a lot of the examples that they noted were from organizations that haven't been in existence very long. Most of them have been in existence 5 years, 3 years or less. In addition to them being relatively new, a lot of those organizations are founded by or created by people who are outside of traditional citizen diplomacy efforts or traditional sector-specific efforts. It's outsiders who have created those. And those outsiders, I think that there's certainly a role for those outsiders, that people who aren't already sort of have the ideas of how things should be done ingrained in them can bring brilliant ideas. I think that those outsiders have managed to do that, have brought good, brilliant ideas, some of which have been great ideas that have been very impactful and have been very creative, others of which have been great ideas which are really cool, but I think that the value of some of those is yet to be proven. The folks who are in the industry need is some way of being able to sort out what is actually going to impact them and what isn't. And I think the outsiders have seen a lot of resistance from the traditional the organizations that have been doing this for more than 5 years. And what I've seen is that that unrecognized role that helps to do that translation are these translators, are these not language translators, but these people within organizations that get it, that can be that bridge between the outsiders who really don't understand well the sector or might not understand some of the challenges and the reasons why the things that they have, the things that they want to bring to change things might not be appropriate, and those people who are on the inside who understand how things have been done, understand what works and what doesn't, understand what the problems with that have been, and can more intuitively see which of these great ideas from outside the sector can be applied and can make change within there. And so I think that the organizations that have been most successful in embracing new media have been those that have staff that are specifically devoted to that role, who have ICT units or innovation units or folks within their organization who have that responsibility of trying to survey this field of new media and figure out what actually would help to improve the delivery mechanisms, the business practices, the way of doing business of that field of that organization or effort. The last thing I would say is, part of the reason that those translators are very necessary at the moment is because the traditional actors in this space aren't used to dealing with in an environment that enables and promotes the sort of openness and collaboration that I hope is coming in the future. That that you need those people who are able to navigate and explain and translate to existing organizations, because groups aren't opening up as much as they can be and talking about this is the way that we do things, these are our challenges, these are our failures, these are the things that we'd really like to be able to do better, and put that information out there in a way that allows innovators to be able to respond to those challenges and to come up with solutions and to be willing to accept solutions that come from outside of your organization. And openness and willingness to look at these other approaches that are different from yours and different from the way that you've been doing things forever, and challenging, and frankly, in some ways, the way that you've been doing things forever. One initiative that I think is great towards making progress on this is the idea is Failfair, which is Mobile Active, an organization called Mobile Active, has had a lead role, and so I hope that Anoush will mention it a bit in the next panel that she's on. But Failfair is a gathering of people in areas, people who are using technology in different areas of international exchange and international development, talking about all of the ways that they've fantastically messed up. And it's really encouraging to see people in the development industry and international development in particular, an area that's very risk averse and very unaccustomed and uncomfortable with the ideal of failure, talking about mistakes that they've made and learning from each other's mistakes rather than repeating them. And so I will end on that and get back to the discussion.
Thanks, Ian. That was great. Yes, Bob.
I'd just like to make two notes before we get into the discussion, and that is, I think that any discussion that we're having today has taken into account two things for citizen diplomacy. One is translation services, machine translation in particular. You were talking translate, and said it wasn't machine translate, but I do want to make that point. We've put quite a number of resources and have this amazing little Swiss genius guy who sits there and has done extraordinary work kind of understanding how to get things into 40 languages very quickly and with some idiomatic accuracy. I don't know if people follow the translation services on Google, but if you take a look at 3 years ago versus now, it's far, far superior to what it was. The second area that I would mention is mobile. Anything you're doing out there, if you really want to talk to people in the developing world, has to be done on a mobile platform. That's how most of the millions, if not billions, of people around the world are going to communicate. Whatever you're planning now, plan to do it with those devices, because if you don't, you're wasting your time.
Thank you, Bob. And for those of you that are interested in those 2 points and those two topics of conversation, stay through for the entire overall panel until 12:15, because we're going to have somebody talking about mobile and somebody talking about translation. So I agree with Bob completely. Those are tremendously important. So thank you all for your comments. I want to make one overarching analytical point and then ask a question. We'll kick it off there. We'll do a series of back and forth up here, and then we'll open it up to questions from everyone in the audience. So it seems to me that, as I think about this, that there are at least three, probably more, but at least three big challenges that I would point to that we face in terms of using new media for the purposes of citizen diplomacy, that is bringing people together across borders. One of those is access, and access can take a variety of different forms, right? The other is skills, and the other is programming, or to be more specific, funding. Many of the people, it's important to note that I think many of the people in this room either run programs or participate in programs or are thinking about starting programs that relate to citizen diplomacy. So funding is a very real reality for them, and we should acknowledge that. And so thinking about those three overarching points, let me ask maybe what I'll do is take them in three chunks of questions and start with access. From each of you, what do you think the challenges are to, what do you think the specific access issues are? If you want to talk about just access to the internet, or you want to talk about access to the hardware that makes access to the internet possible, mobile phones, whatever you think. What do you think the challenges are to access? And what do you see as the opportunities to try to address it, to try to increase access, which is one of the recommendations in our report, that there needs to be more access to the internet. And of course, for Bob, the issue of an open internet and corporate involvement in that is also a major factor.
Well, I mean, maybe just at a very high level, I think I would say that as far as access to the internet or access to mobile and some of these tools, the market is going to take care of a lot of those things more quickly than those of us can. But the market is going to leave certain folks out. And I think that most of the efforts from people like us have been around how do you get access to those underserved communities, whether it's rural areas or whether it's women or youth or underrepresented minorities. How do you expand access in a targeted way to groups that are left out of what the market's already doing? And so that's where a lot of the access initiatives that I've seen have been focused. Troy would know a lot more about that than I would.
I was in Congo last week, in the northeast part of the country, where the Lord's Resistance Army has been raping, killing, kidnapping people, especially children, for the past few years. And the point of the trip was to figure out how we can increase communications to basically help increase citizen protection, so that fewer children are kidnapped and forced into being soldiers. And it was primarily a question of access. And someone mentioned low tech. We're actually very seriously considering increasing the amount of ham radios in the region, which is a very old technology. But on the new end of things, and it's something quite exciting. I agree with Ian that it is largely a function of market forces, and thank God for Chinese knockoff smartphones, because they're for all the things we like to do with smartphones, they've driven down the price to like $40 for a fake iPhone that you see in Kabul. And in any case, in Congo, we actually, I think, lucked out timing-wise in terms of where the technology is, in terms of where the industry is, and we're looking at using something called local switching, which is when one tower, if we're standing next to each other right now, and I call you, the call goes back to the central server and then back to you again. But with local switching, the technology allows you to go to the closest tower and back again, meaning that the call doesn't need to be routed by VSAT, by satellite to Kinshasa, and we can save money, and brings down the tower price by orders of magnitude. So it looks like we'll be able to introduce cellular connectivity to these areas, which are very vulnerable because of the lack of communications. And simultaneously, by introducing, because of Edge, GPRS, 3G, LTE, and so on, you simultaneously introduce internet connectivity. And so I'm actually really excited about something called local switching as of the last week. But in addition to that, I think that it's important that a lot of social factors figure into why there's limited access. In a lot of countries, young women can't go without a male relative escort. When they get to an internet cafe, they're playing shoot 'em up games and they're shouting and they're smoking and sort of it's type of environment. Females have a harder time accessing, and I think that even beyond access, once you get to the web, are you finding content in your own language? And that's a big issue, even for Arabic. I mean, Arabic is a country's
web.
Yeah,
Arabic, yeah.
Despite the larger percentage of users who are primarily Arabic speakers. So there are issues we work on in a variety of ways, both through democracy promotion and economic growth promotion activities.
Go ahead.
I would second and third what I've heard here thus far. I would say that the big question here is openness. Openness in its many different definitions. And in particular, preventing the kinds of monopolies that you see developing here and hoping they don't become a fever that transfers itself to other countries. The fact that you have any kind of device that's tied to another network makes no sense to me. I mean, to a single network makes no sense to me. I think devices and networks ought to be interchangeable, at the very least. I mean, that's a very basic rule to me that ought to happen across the board. And I think that in the developing world, we certainly are going to have to see low-tech solutions in the near term. If you look at places like Uganda, if you look at places like Zimbabwe, those are the kinds of societies in which the need for these technologies is clear, but in which the high-tech solutions via satellite, the landlines simply don't exist. People have to use mobile devices. They have to use simplest technology possible, SMS, and move from there. So those are the kinds of access questions that I see out there that are really important. And I would like to see more international governance bodies supporting kind of a floor for what's available for citizens in all countries. I would not like to see them participate in any way in content regulation.
I want to jump on the point that Troy made about once people get onto the internet, access is certainly an issue, and more needs to be done to provide those computer centers that accommodate women and accommodate people with disabilities and underserved populations. But once people get on the internet and are able to access some tools, what are they doing with them? And the issue of language and not being able to access local news or things that in their local language is really problematic, especially when you're dealing in countries that are repressive, where the news is filtered, the media is filtered. So what people are reading, if they can find it in their local language, is largely filtered. I know that you've had that experience too. And they're not able to really locate the kind of unbiased news that's important to them and really improves their own lives and livelihoods and provides an opportunity to create social networks around issue areas that are important, or to collaborate in a way that improves their communities.
Beyond that, I mean, I know, David, when you were talking about literacy, you were talking about digital literacy, but I mean, I think literacy in many countries is a challenge as well. Moving from a very text-based internet to an audio and visual-based internet, which I think is one of the things that's going to be addressed in the next panel, the technologies that make video easier, that make translation of video easier, that make audio easier. It expands the number of people who can access that to the large numbers of illiterate folks around the world. And again, having those products be available in local languages is very important for those populations.
And in low-tech ways that people can access it, because a lot of the video and streaming that we're able to use and we take advantage of regularly, people in the developing world just don't have high-speed internet. Again, that goes back to access. These points are really interconnected.
Well, that goes to so that actually they are interconnected, and that flows right into the question of skills. So all of you, in one way or another, are connected to helping people improve their skills to be able to use the web. Even Google, which I think, while you all don't run, maybe you do, and I'm not even aware of it, run specific programs to help people become more knowledgeable about how to use the web. There's so much information on Google to teach you how to use different tools and things on the web. So sort of same question, but along the skills line, what do you see as the biggest challenges? You've identified some of them already, literacy and so forth, to people improving their skills to use the web. And what do you see as the ways to try to address that, whether it be through your own specific programs? Ian and Elizabeth, you guys both run programs that work on this. Troy, you are involved, I'm sure, in a whole series of programs. What do you all see as the ways to try to improve those skills moving forward for the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've felt different ways about this issue over time. My temperature on the moment is really to focus on content providers and service providers. Like, if you can help the people who have meaningful things to deliver to be able to do that in a more effective way. The studies that are out there and work that's been done has shown that even people with low levels of digital literacy will find ways, will learn the keystrokes that they need to get the credit that they need, or to transfer the money that they need, or to get the access to the medical services that they need. So if you're creating that compelling reason and providing good information and good services online, people will figure it out, or they'll be able to find somebody who can help them to figure it out. And I think that as far as making an impact, really focusing on that side is where you can make the biggest impact in promoting digital literacy.
Go ahead.
I think we're trying to get away from the math of, people need training, give them training, and then that will lead to making assumptions about certain types of activity. I think a more strategic emphasis is on giving them sort of reasons to be there. Like if there's information that affects their lives directly on a local level, or if you can facilitate their voice as well, then they're more interested in hearing what that news source has to say about whatever. So I kind of call that the principle of echo. That if I somehow contribute like feedback to a news story, or if I want to know that my comment was heard. So if you sort of like if you leave it in a suggestion box, you want to see that was posted, or if you leave a comment on a sort of a pre-recorded system, you want to know that like the radio, like on a radio story, that a radio program, that the radio host heard your program. So in Afghanistan, we're engaged in the largest ever experiment with the use of IVR, interactive voice response. It's pre-recorded audio content that you access via your phone via a menu. Press 1 for news, press 2 for weather, for example. But we're actually going to take all of the country's independent news information and make it available via mobile phones for free for Afghans. But we're going to go beyond that and actually make it available for citizens as well to post their own sort of audio blogs, or mobile blogs, as you would call them. So that they sort of give them voice as well, and to have some reason that they are brought to this news platform, this information platform that is about themselves, such that they are sort of, by virtue of proximity, interested in hearing about the other news information and that's available on the platform. And in order to do so, they'll need to learn some basic skills of navigating the system and uploading content and stuff. So it's more about what personally is at stake for them. And for more on sort of the, I guess, is it the supply or demand side? I guess both, in a way.
Okay, so both you and Ian are saying content. Is that by helping to create the content that people want, that you engage them.
Empowering them to create their own.
And empowering them to create their own content. Right, and services, right. Yeah. Okay.
I agree with that. I think it's important to have people really have a stake in what it is that they're getting online and looking for. But I think that when we focus so much on social media and on the internet, we sometimes lose sight of the social. And all of us have traveled to these places and to developing nations. And there's something to be said, too, for that face-to-face, teaching people how to use these tools. they don't always see the applicability. If they've never had the internet in their home community, if they've never had a working computer, they don't understand. And I don't mean to talk down by any means, but it's not always understood what is really possible online, what a blog can really do, or what, say in the case of Iran, what a Twitter hashtag can do, and the kind of social gathering place that you can create online that translates offline. So having that face-to-face really is valuable, and working with local trainers, people on the ground who speak the local language, who understand a lot of the idiosyncrasies and the challenges, for example, of women not being able to go to computer centers, or if you're working in really tough countries with heavy-handed regimes, the challenges that students are going to have when they do go on and they're monitored. You know, those kinds of realities that young people, anybody, needs to know and really needs to have reinforced in a format where you have local experts training other locals.
We do run training programs for folks around the world in these areas. The most important skill, I think, is teaching people how to protect themselves online. I hate to go back to sounding like, Mr. Chicken Little here. I guess it comes from a national security background and having read Intel for 7 years. But these governments are damn smart. And anybody who underestimates the power of some of these governments to use these tools just as quickly as the geniuses on the other side are developing them is underestimating the power of the governments to bring in the right people, to pay those people a living wage in that country, and to give them certain motivations to perform their jobs well. And I think that it's an obligation that all of us have, NGOs, corporations, government, whoever we are, to teach the skill of survival on the internet. Self-protection, be it through where you don't access the internet. For example, I would not recommend going to your average internet cafe in China. To what subjects you shouldn't be trying to access if you don't want to get on a list. So I hate to be sounding negative about all of this, because I actually believe very strongly that people should be doing these things, but I want them to do these things in a very safe manner. And those are skills which can be transferred. And there are a number of groups out there which have security in a box or have things. The only other thing I would say is the media in which this should be delivered is video, if you're not there yourself. We have discovered over time that the use of video to actually teach folks is extraordinarily effective, and that if you get the right person who they can look at and identify with, and it's done in the right language, then you really can teach people very rapidly about how to use the internet, use basic services, and move forward. And I think you'll hear more about that in the next panel as well.
So let me just follow up on that, Bob. So it sounds like what you're saying is, if we want to try to expand citizen diplomacy programs, and we're thinking people all over the world are going to engage across borders, one of the most important skills to give them is their ability to be able to protect themselves in doing so. So the three other people on the panel, you all are involved either directly running programs or helping to fund programs that are increasing the use of the internet. Are any of the three of you directly involved in programs that are doing what Bob's suggesting?
In terms of securing, really enforcing security, yeah, great example. And something that, for those of you who are implementing programs, you get really excited that you're doing, say, a cross-border project. We'll say Azerbaijan and Armenia, which I just did last year in PH, worked on. You want your students to friend each other on Facebook and really start getting connected, having these wonderful conversations, and you cry, oh, this is citizen diplomacy, and it's great. every student, for example, in the program that I was working on, the program was .com, every Azerbaijani student that friended an Armenian student had their Facebook page shut. They all were forced to unfriend the Armenian student, or else, and I'll put that in quotes. The same group of students, if you're familiar with Eurovision, it's like American Idol, but with Europe and Asia. And they had competitors on Eurovision that were Armenian, Azerbaijani, from all across Europe. And any student, anyone in Azerbaijan that texted support of the Armenian singer in this competition was questioned by the Azerbaijani government. Now, that all it was 4368 or whatever the number was on their mobile phone. But the government is incredibly smart and is able to track that kind of involvement, that kind of perceived support of the other. So what's really important for myself as someone that implements programs, or for Ian or any of you who are doing this, is when you're working with students, working with young people, working with journalists. This is really important with journalists. Bloggers around the world are daily threatened because of their posts, because of who they friend on Facebook. It's really, really important to make sure that students and people that you're working with have a real awareness that their online identity is not private. We like to think that it's private, that we have our group of friends on Facebook or we have our group of followers on Twitter. It may be personal, but personal and private are not the same thing. So all of that content that young people and I harp on young people deliberately because they're minors. And I think that it has a whole other set of particular concerns. And they're the digital natives. They're the ones who are fluent online and are really, really embracing the tools in much greater numbers than adults. But it's really important that is part of your program, that talking about security issues, talking about the difference between private and personal, that just because they're online and it's personal doesn't mean that stuff is private, is really, really critical. And being proactive about that can save you a lot of trouble, and I know that you've had that experience as well. So just something for those of you who are in programs to really be mindful of.
And I think it's really challenging for people who want to get things done and do projects in the field. My experiences, I can share my experiences with NDI on this. NDI takes the security of its partners, its local partners, very seriously. And certainly over the years where we've done programs, or NDI, where I've done programs with NDI in risky areas, we've implemented a number of different ways to secure communications with partners. The policy of NDI for a long time had been that NDI's own communications would not be an attempt to secure those, that them being open and probably tapped by the government was a better strategy, and being sort of above the board was better than trying to secure those and having the suspicion that would cause, given that NDI felt that what they were doing was in many places legitimate. But I think even that stance globally is being reconsidered. I've been involved in a few different projects that have specifically focused on secure communications and how do you help activists working in repressive areas. And it is difficult. On those we've had to be very careful. We've had independent security consultants involved, numerous independent computer security consultants involved with those. But I think you certainly see organizations whose enthusiasm for the technology far outstrips their ability to really think about the security implications of it. So I've seen a lot of organizations that are really promoting Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of social networking tools without really doing a good job of making people aware of the risks that are there, even just basic email communications and mobile communications, mobile in particular. There's a lot of enthusiasm about mobile for the reasons that Bob mentioned, but mobile is probably the least secure communications device that people have access to, deliberately so in a lot of places. And so it's challenging in that you want to handle this in a responsible way. You want to give people good advice on security while you're giving, so that they can make the decision, so that they have the information they need to make decisions. But giving security advice feels like giving legal or financial advice. The last thing you want to do is give bad advice and put somebody at risk, and the last thing you want to do is have that come back to you that you were the person who told someone that this was okay, and it turned out that that wasn't okay. And it's just such a hard field for many people to get their heads around, that unless we start hiring computer security consultants to be party to every project that involves new media, it seems it's hard to think about how we get around this. And I think some of the things that Bob mentioned about having products like Security in a Box and things like that that you can point to is a good first step, but I think it's a first step.
I would point out a major kind of challenge here, and it's a challenge that's existed for many years, and that is that most of the telecom companies that control the information that's on mobile phones were government monopolies. Some have been privatized, but they still have a default position of, if the government asks for this information, we will give it to them. That's true in this country, and it's true across Western Europe still, and it's certainly true in the developing world, where they're still government-owned in many cases. So the fact that these devices are unsecure and the personally identifiable information on them can be passed along shouldn't come as a big surprise to anyone. It's simply a different generation of companies and a different origin of those companies than companies, say, like Google.
Just briefly, I think that the biggest, we do fund, to answer the question, we do fund a ton of training activities in terms of security in a variety of regions of the world. But I think that one of the things that hasn't necessarily been said so far, but it's sort of they've danced around the issue, is that the biggest threat to security usually is the human factor, not the technology factor.
Sure.
And I think one of the challenges, you see a lot of small organizations who can't afford really, really smart security people. So because of their sort of entrepreneurial character, they face certain sort of forms of vulnerability. And someone who in your organization knows the difference between SSH and SSL and can do some of that information to protect you is probably going to cost too much. They're going to make more money in California, so they're not going to work for your NGO. And so we're seeing some talk and some efforts of, or a sort of a pooling of organizational efforts in the name of security, possibly trying to cloud some sort of defense against DDoS attacks. And I think that there's potential for major corporations. Direct denial of service attacks, that's when your website basically is it's pinged so many times that it brings it down by use of a bot network. So in any case, it's very expensive.
It's basically a way to censor people by taking your website down so that people can't access it.
These attacks are actually for sale online. You can pay for the number of bots that you want to attack a certain website that you don't like.
Let me give people an idea of the sophistication of this. During the Burmese election period and directly after, during the release of Aung San Suu Kyi from house arrest, there was a massive DDoS attack on Burma, which shut down its networks for a certain number of days. I can't really say at the moment how many days. And it appears, according to some blogs, which are fairly reliable, that the Burmese government itself launched the DDoS attack through a third party in order to make it look like it wasn't its fault for shutting down its own network. So when we're talking about sophistication and changes and who's to blame and who you can look at, it's a very, very complex world out there right now.
So I had one more question, but I'm going to put it aside because I know we have questions from the audience, and I want to make sure we have some time for that. The question I was going to ask, just for the record, was about funding and programs and what's being done to try to fund more programs in new media, and I'm going to guess that some kind of similar question is going to come from the audience. So please raise your hands, and I'll try to move through as quickly as we can. And please try to be brief because we are short on time. Here, and then we'll move across to the left and to the back.
Good morning, and thank you all. I'm Anoush. I'm at Atlas Court. And I want to touch back when you're talking about, I think it's an interesting analysis of international development in general. A lot of programs, obviously, is one arena within the media. What focus do you think is being put on risk think they'll be in the future? Is that a high priority, that there is this risk management saying, okay, these are the possible dangers that we can face when we enter a new country when promoting this type of use of new media? So we need to educate the people, or do you think the value is, we need to put it out there, and when those dangers come up, then that's what needs to happen? So really interesting to hear your perspective about the risk analysis piece.
Yeah, and for us, when we're thinking about new media, it's helping some organization locally, whether it's a government entity or an NGO, get its head around new media and how it uses it. And certainly that user-driven and the participatory nature of it is both a blessing and a curse in some ways. But I think if an organization is seriously interested in being successful using new media, they need to embrace the characteristics and culture of new media, and they need to embrace that fact that some people might post something that's inaccurate, or some people might post something that isn't exactly on message, and helping them think about how they deal with those situations when they come up, and try to make that into a positive. And a lot of times you can. Certainly, it's something that you, at the beginning of a program design, you need to consider: is new media appropriate for this? Are you trying to collect information that could stand up in a court of law, or information that people are going to have their lives depending on? Is the level of accuracy required suitable to the technology we're using? But I think that there's a lot to suggest that new media and these tools aren't as bad as people assume that they are, as far as the studies that Wikipedia is as accurate as Encyclopedia Britannica, that they contain about the same number of mistakes or even less. So it is sort of it's a fun discussion to have each time you do design. And I think the people who are doing this responsibly are having those conversations at the beginning of a design.
Let me respond to this from a different perspective, a corporate perspective. We do human rights assessments prior to entering any new country or prior to introducing any new product into a country. Thus, back in 2006, when we went into China, we decided not to do Gmail or Blogger. Why? Because we wanted to avoid a Shutao situation. That's the name of the Chinese dissident who, because of Alibaba, which is the Chinese-controlled company that owns it, that Yahoo is part of in China. Anyway, we wanted to avoid that situation where PII, personally identifiable information, would be on our servers in the Chinese mainland, So we take this very seriously. The Global Network Initiative, GNI, which I mentioned earlier, has also focused on this question very carefully. Human rights assessments are very important, I think, for all companies, and should be important for NGOs. The GNI is trying to put together a centralized database of these reports. The good news is that Freedom House has now sponsored for the last year, and coming up is doing another report on an internet censorship ranking, which is included in both the State Department human rights reports and in the Millennium Challenge Challenge Corporation's democracy criteria. I think that's very important stuff that's going on there. They're expanding it by another 30 countries. So there are a number of places you can go and look to see just how dangerous it is. One thing we're going to be funding in the next year is a review of essentially laws that relate to mobile phones around the world, so that people can see when you have a mobile phone in X country or Y country, what kind of data the government has access to before you begin to use that device. So I think that this is a really important area for people to be looking at.
Right here in the black, and then we'll move over there to the left.
When you've been focusing mostly on how social media works in other countries, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the U.S. and when students come, especially minors, from countries like Yemen and Pakistan and Somalia or wherever, and come to the U.S. and suddenly they have all this access to social media, how we can educate
Security. I would really focus on security as central. Once students come to the United States, and you're right, they get this plethora of tools that they can use. They love them. They, by and large, and they're really active on Facebook. They're active on Twitter, and really take advantage of them. Depending on the program that they're a part of and why they're coming to the United States, they may very well be monitored by their home country. So a lot of the posts that they're putting on Facebook and other social networking sites, again, depending on the program and the reason that they're here, for example, if they're here for a State Department program, or an official visit, they're very likely going to be monitored by their home country, depending on that. Like if you're talking about, say, Saudi Arabia or Azerbaijan, or a country that is really vigilant about watching online communication. So in terms of going back home, there's some real risks. One, there's the risk of having had all of these conversations archived. They might very well, when they get back, and this has certainly happened, they might very well be faced with explaining themselves, so to speak, for what they've put online. And also just the kinds of ongoing dialogue they choose to have with, if you're dealing with countries in conflict and people, students in each country choose to stay in communication, there are risks associated with that when they go home. In situations that I've worked in, it may be something as sort of innocuous as just unfriending someone on a social networking site, or it could be as serious as having parents questioned by authorities for what their children said, either during an exchange program or any kind of ongoing communication that they've had once they've gotten home. So we don't want to scare young people. These are great tools. We're the adults in the room, so we can act like parents and go through the whole litany of concerns that we might have. Hopefully you're not going to face a lot of them. But we think about worst case scenarios, especially program people who have this hardwired mentality to look at the worst case scenario. But the most important thing is to just make sure that the students really understand that nothing that is posted online or texted goes away. That it's archived, it's saved, people see it. People forward what you post online. So if you're sending a message to someone from across the border, that person may very well forward it along. And without the context of the conversation, that comment, that statement can be taken to mean a whole variety of things and interpreted how a government may choose to. So the most important thing is just to let students know that people are watching. And to be really, really vigilant about what they do and don't say online.
So Elizabeth gave a pretty full answer to that, so unless there's an objection from the panel, I'll go on to the next question. All right, right here, and then let's move to the back, because I know there's a few people who've had their hand up for a while.
Thanks. Darius Woodbury, Center for Civic Education. Ian, I was curious about the NDI's reconsidering its approach to online communication and becoming an open model rather than a more secure model. Can you talk about what is it calling that?
I thought you said the opposite.
Are there any specific incidences that occurred?
Yeah, no. This is within NDI's own communication among its 70 field offices and headquarters. How do they communicate? Not so much partners, where our communications recommendations to partners would be very much country specific, but as a global policy. Yeah, I'm not the best person to speak to that on NDI's behalf, but I'll do my best to give my understanding of it. Is that that's something that's really been considered on an ongoing basis over time. Certainly, there have been cases for years, for decades, of NDI staff being harassed, physically, harassed and otherwise by government security services, or being held by government security around the world forever. And again, the policy for a long time had been that trying to secure email or trying to secure communications would make that would increase that risk rather than decreasing that risk. And I think that enough has changed in the past few years. NDI's email has been attacked, also been under attack by folks, by attacks originating from China. And so they're working with law enforcement agencies in the U.S., thinking about how they better secure their communications, or what sort of security precautions are appropriate and necessary. And so, again, I don't know where that's all going to shake out, but I know that it's a new day and time to have that conversation again.
I think we have time for a couple more, if we can keep them somewhat brief. Okay. Somebody's pointing at somebody else back there. Go ahead.
I have a question about broadcasting more governors on the budget of about $700 million a year, and broadcast radio, programs, television programs. I guess my question is, how do users in the new media interrelate with government broadcasts, either through Voice of America or some more comparative outlets such as Radio Sawa, and are there people out there that respond to that stuff through mobile devices, and what happens to it, and what are the consequences of reacting to U.S. voicemail, so to speak, via the broadcasting board governor outlet?
Okay, thank you. Why don't you take that, Troy?
I think it depends on the country. I know that the BBG, and I see someone from the BBG in the room, so maybe I should be careful. I can't speak for the BBG directly, but I know that they are using a variety of circumvention tools for the sake of getting out their content, depending on the country, depending on the language. So you see them using Tor, Ultrasurf and stuff, Siphon, to get out BBG content. That's primarily in the Middle East, as far as I understand. And I think that, but it's different. So, for example, Studio 7, which is the Voice of America version specifically for Zimbabwe, they use an IVR system, which is redirecting. I mean, it's pulling stuff. It's the BBG service available via a mobile phone. All the news content available via mobile phone, and that's pulled via RSS. Sorry, I'm too technical here. I think that the services get you to the content through a secure portal, if you're talking about online specifically, and I think that you can then get to other available content which otherwise would be censored in particular countries. If you're accessing it via mobile phone, then it's not secure. So already, forget about forwarding it to anybody. You're already at risk just by accessing it. If you signed up for SMS news updates, like headline updates, or if you're contacting via, I'm trying not to be too technical, if you're using a GSM VoIP gateway, if you are calling a local number to access web-based content, then again, you are putting yourself at risk for just accessing the content. But BBG has been very successful, I know, at getting their content past censors. But I think it's been very successful, but still the risks remain, as far as I understand.
Okay, last question for this panel, and then we'll seamlessly switch to the next one, I hope. Right there in the back, the woman in the yellow has had her hand up for a while.
Thank you. I'm Sahar Taman, and one of the things I wanted to mention, I really appreciate your emphasis on security, but I think we should also recognize that most of the people who are on the other end of these countries know those risks. They know those risks outside of technology, and they know those risks to some degree in technology, and it's up to us to educate them. But people are willing. People are willing to go online, even minors. They have something to say. People are willing, as in the case of Egypt, Khalid Said had suffered a lot of brutal consequences and died, actually. And after him, people are still willing to support what it is that they stand out for. People are willing to go to jail. I know people who have gone to jail because they're willing to do so. So I think we should be cognizant that we can teach people that there are lots of clues. If someone drops off on the other end for a while, that's the kind of clue we can tell. Maybe they're not able to continue the communication, but they might be able to come back. Those are the kind of non-technology information that you could also teach as part of security.
Okay.
I would like to take objection to that. I am not in the business, nor is my company, of enabling torture, prosecution, or people exposing themselves to unnecessary harm or persecution. I do believe that people can make a choice for themselves, but I have now been in contact with dissidents from around the world who come from more traditional NGOs of the Samizdat era, for example. And frankly, they really don't understand what they're doing on the internet. And I feel it is our obligation to try and inform them about the dangers therein, the dangers that mobile phone in particular poses to them. And so I'm not going to accept your premise here on this one. I kind of live by the bus theory of life. I can walk out the door and be hit by a bus, so why would I add to the other things in my life that could cause me to run into trouble? I think it's always better to educate oneself, and we're going to continue those education efforts and supporting organizations that are out there educating people who are trying to have their voices heard.
Okay. On that note, we're going to attempt something here. We're going to attempt to seamlessly switch from one sub-panel to the next sub-panel, and I'm going to ask our panelists here, with my great appreciation, thank you for being here today, to step aside, and we'll bring up the new. Please do stay for the second sub-panel. We'll be continuing in just one moment.
This computer is just stable.
Yeah, that's happening in the next. Yeah. Yes. All right. This is the recommendation, right? This is the recommendation. This is the technology.
Well, he's going to do that. Yeah, I did that earlier in the first session, and I'm just going to make a quick comment at the beginning and then turn it over.
Oh, you are?
Who's going to? Are you Mike turning to you, or are you going to introduce? I'm just going to make a couple of quick comments, but then I'm just going to turn it over to whoever.
All right, and then I want you to show.
Okay. Okay.
Let's keep going.
Could we please get everyone, I know you may want to talk to some people, but you may have to catch them after the next panel or over the next 2 days so we can kind of keep moving. I apologize for that. While we're kind of getting organized here, I just was going to make a couple of quick comments, somewhat personal nature. I'm with a company that about 1.5 years ago I started. I do a lot in the Middle East, and came across on my graduate school's website. Some of you may have heard of the school Thunderbird. I don't know if anyone in here is also a graduate there, but I found in our alumni network an individual in Doha that was involved in education, and found his email through, I don't remember how I found it, maybe it was LinkedIn or something. or on the alumni network, and we started communicating, and then we started Skyping for about a year, and I finally met him in Doha this past year in March, and over the last 6 months, we just announced last month a business relationship as a result of all this, and to help in the area of professional development for teachers. And so I guess my point here is, and obviously many of you have stories, is just it probably would have taken me maybe years to this have happened without the use of the technology to be able to find someone from a business standpoint that we could work with. I also need to ask, I have a 7-year-old who's almost an 8-year-old, believe it or not, in second grade here in Maryland, and I'm going to ask you, she's been asking me, she knows how to, she has a laptop at home, an inexpensive one that she connects with her school stuff and whatever and websites. What I need to ask you though, my wife and I are having a debate. My daughter now wants an iPhone for Christmas. So this might make or break what I do. How many of you, and you know, obviously this is an easy decision for you because you're not spending the money, but if you were spending the money, would you buy your 7, almost 8-year-old daughter an iPhone for Christmas? So how many say yes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the rest of you are no. Okay. The rest are no's. Is that? I assume that. Okay. All right. I will tally that information and tell my wife that and I don't know. I will somewhat guess this might be a cross sampling of America. I don't know. I'll pose it that way, have decided that my daughter should not get this. Now, we'll see how this debate turns out. So if I see you in January or February and you run into me, you can ask me how this turns out. But anyway, I'm now going to turn it back over for our next session. I appreciate everybody moving on. I'll turn it back over to David to introduce Sheldon and our panel. And don't forget, 12:15, if you want to stick around, you can connect or watch the virtual school Skype activity here. You may have to suffer for lunch. But anyway, thank you.
All right. Thank you all again for staying. I just want to introduce our moderator, and then I'll let him introduce our panelists. So Sheldon Himelfarb is an Associate Vice President at the U.S. Institute of Peace, where he is Executive Director for 2 centers of innovation, the Center for Science, Technology, and Peacebuilding, and the Center for Media, Conflict, and Peacebuilding. He has managed peacebuilding programs in numerous conflicts, including Bosnia, Iraq, Angola, Liberia, Macedonia, Burundi, and received the Capital Area Peacemaker Award from American University. Sheldon joined USIP from the Corporate Executive Board, where he was on the Technology Practice Leadership Team, working with chief information officers from governments, universities, and multinational corporations. Prior to this, he served as foreign policy advisor to a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the head of the North American Documentary Development for Yorkshire TV, and the CEO executive producer for Common Ground Productions, the media division of Search for Common Ground. He is an award-winning filmmaker, former commentator for National Public Radio, and author of numerous articles on politics, popular culture, and conflict. He holds a PhD from Oxford University and a BA in political science from Johns Hopkins. He has held visiting or guest scholar positions at the Brookings Institution, Harvard, and the Paul Nitze School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins. Sheldon?
Thank you. Thanks a lot, David. And it's a great privilege and a great honor to be here. This is an extremely important topic that we have to talk about today. And all the excitement and enthusiasm and the numbers of folks that you find in this building tells me 2 things. One is that citizen diplomacy seems to be entering kind of a new phase. It's an idea whose time has come. We've been talking about it for lots of decades. But the second point is, one of the reasons for that is exactly what we are here to talk about. That part of the reason why citizen diplomacy is entering this new, unprecedented period of enthusiasm, I would say, is because of where we've come in terms of media and technology. The simple fact is, for the first time in the history of humankind, all of us have the ability to make media, create media at little or no cost, and send it around the world with the push of a button. That's unprecedented history. That gives us an unparalleled ability to reach out as citizens, to talk to citizens on the other side of the planet. And what we're going to do on this panel today is talk about how, in fact, we are using that power. We're going to talk about it in terms of, from the tools perspective, right? That first panel was talking about it from a policy perspective, and they kicked the can down the road to us on a couple of things. I hope we're going to have enough time. We only have an hour, so I'm not going to, offer any long introductory remarks, other than to say they did tee up a couple of things that we are going to be talking about, which is where is video conferencing, translation services, what's the power of mobile phones for citizen diplomacy, and so forth. So with that, let me jump into it. What I'm going to do is acknowledge that each one of these folks have been pioneers in their own fields, and we are extremely lucky to have them. They really have been working in lots of different ways about how to build bridges among people. And so we want to take advantage of their different experiences. I'm going to ask each of them individually to comment, because they work in such different technologies. I'm going to ask them each to comment on the recommendation that was in the report that is specifically addressed to their area, and comment very briefly. And then we are going to just kind of throw it open, take your questions from the floor for a very interactive session. So be thinking about the kinds of things you want to ask this brain trust here, who really have been at the cutting edge of a number of the core technologies driving this new era of citizen diplomacy. So let me start here with Lucas Welch. And by the way, the long bios for all these folks you can find online. We all know that. That's the power of the internet. So I'm going to cut to the chase here, given the amount of limited time that we have. Lucas is the founder and chief innovation officer of an organization called Soliya. Soliya is specifically called out in the Citizens Diplomacy Report for its cutting-edge virtual exchange program called Soliya Connect. How many of you have heard of Soliya Connect? Good. Lots of folks in the room. So it's a really, it was just a pioneering way to connect university-age kids in the Muslim world with university-age kids in the West to talk, have meaningful dialogue, facilitated dialogue, curriculum-based dialogue. And Lucas, the report makes a very strong recommendation for ratcheting up the investment that we make in video conferencing technologies and virtual exchange programs. So let me ask you, Lucas, to start us off by tell us a little bit, very little about what Soliya is doing, because I've just sort of set it up, but more importantly, where do you see video conferencing technologies, virtual exchanges, and your view on this strong recommendation? We all know the power of interpersonal exchanges, the Fulbright program, the Rotary programs, and so forth. It is one of the shining stars of our public diplomacy program to date. It's transformative personal experience. We're talking about something different, and Lucas has been a pioneer in that something different. So Lucas, take it away. Tell us where you are in this evolution of the online exchange world and where we're going.
Great. Thank you, Sheldon. I appreciate it.
And I will be a ruthless timekeeper, I have to admit.
How much time?
About 3 minutes to start off. Then we'll come back.
Great. I mean, I think the first thing I'd like to talk to is sort of, at the high level, why. Why is video conferencing so important in this context? And I think that as we look at, we specifically work on the divide between Western and predominantly Muslim societies. And we have as powerful as traditional exchange is, and as important as traditional exchange is, we're very mindful of the limitations in terms of reach that study abroad programs have in our current context. I mean, the costs, of course, of going abroad, the visa restrictions, all pose very significant obstacles to doing that at a significant scale. With the program we've been doing over the last several years, we feel that on certain key areas, we've been able to demonstrate not the same level of impact, of course, as going abroad and experiencing another culture and, walking through a souk or dining at a restaurant, but we are enabling people to form relationships and form relationships that enable them to develop a different opinion of another individual. And there's strong research that shows that if you develop a different opinion of an individual, that generalizes to your impressions of that entire identity group. And so we think that with new media technologies, there's an opportunity now to do that at a radically different scale. And so one of the things that we've been talking to Sheldon about is a vision of Exchange 2.0. If we can work together to enhance and augment existing exchange so that we can reach not only the people who already go abroad so they can have a deeper experience after they come back, but also reach those people who won't ever leave their home countries, who simply wouldn't have the opportunity to have such a rich, intense experience, but to do that in a way that is facilitated, enables deep understanding of another culture. We think there's a real opportunity to do that. So why don't I just stop there for now?
Good. We should come back to it because, honestly, from where we sit at the United States Institute of Peace, we are wondering, in fact, indeed, why shouldn't every single university and even high school kid in America and in other countries, why shouldn't they have exposure to a serious online intercultural experience given the technology today? So let's talk about the technology. And that's a great segue to Michael, because, of course, one of the big inhibiting factors in doing intercultural exchanges online is the language barrier. And Michael has dedicated his second career, I guess I'd say Michael Smolens is from the CEO and founder of dotSUB, which is another company on the cutting edge of digital diplomacy. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, they do web-based video translation and subtitling. Now, I confess, when Michael first brought this concept to me, I was a little skeptical because what he described, the early stages of this company, was entirely a Wikipedia model of translation. How could we harness the wisdom of crowds for demolishing linguistic barriers? So let's talk about, Michael, where you've come. I know you've expanded from the crowdsourced, volunteer crowdsourced Wikipedia model also to providing translation, high-end translation services to those who are able to afford it and so forth. But let's get to your, I know you're translating all of the TED Talks these days into multiple languages, making a huge contribution to citizen diplomacy in that way. So it's an incredibly important thing that you're doing. Tell us, where are we in the virtual translation? Let me specifically read the quote that was in the report that we want you to comment on. The recommendation from the task force was we should be doing more to invest in facilitating online simultaneous or near simultaneous translations. What's your take on that recommendation?
Well, let me thank you very much. This is my 9th startup, my first one in technology, and I just want to make a few comments to set the framework. The most important thing that is missing in this dialogue is awareness of the fact that you need to communicate in other languages. And more important than that, you need to show the sensitivity to people in other cultures that you are aware of their desire to be communicated with or have the ability to communicate in native languages, in spite of the fact you might not be able to make any money doing that. Okay, so I want to make it very clear that that is the framework that we want to talk about. I am dedicating my life to removing language as a barrier to cross-cultural communication via video. So the things that Google was talking about are very, very much in line. And just a few comments. There's 6,700 languages in the world. They're disappearing very rapidly, and those languages are all identified in culture. There's 12 to 15 languages that represent 85% of the people in the world, and 300 languages that represent 95% of the people of the world. So if you want to take a look at the two types of conversations or dialogue or communication that people have, it's real-time or archival, synchronous or asynchronous. But the recommendation is for that real-time communication. But if you think about the number of hours in a day or week that you spend, most of the time you are spending looking at archival media. You're not doing it in real time. So both of those issues are extremely important. And there is machine translation, AI translation, audio to text conversion that are all improving very, very rapidly. So in all cases, they are better than nothing. In cases with international brands, none of them want their brands to identify with people that are not quite accurate. So there's a lot to be talked about with machine translation and audio to text. And so we want to talk about that. And what we want to do is talk about efforts to communicate across cultures. There are 2 billion people of the world right now that speak English as a second language. It's the largest language demographic in the world. 2% of the GDP in Korea is spent on English language learning. $15 billion in Japan. The Chinese government has launched an effort to open 1,000 Confucian institutes around the world to teach Chinese culture and Chinese language. 600 of them are already in place. One of them has just been announced going into New York with State University of New York. We are working on a lot of programs. The most prominent is TED, where TED Talks are available for the crowd. In 16 months, 12,700 talks have been translated and subtitled into 79 languages by 4,800 volunteers. We're working with an Indian meditation guru, and we're working on using Indian volunteers to translate his teachings into the 14 languages in India that are spoken by more than 10 million people, and having those available for distribution on a mobile device. So the message that I want to give is the fact it's entirely possible, and what we need to do is give many people in the world wake up hopeless and helpless every morning. And if we give them the ability to feel that they can become involved and engaged to help get media, inspirational messages, and important messages in their language, the world will become very, very involved. So that's what we're all about.
So we've got questions for where we are in translation, comparing things that we all use, like Google Translate, Yahoo Babelfish, to what Michael is doing. Hold those questions. We'll get to you. Let me turn now to Anoush Tatevossian, who may be working on the hottest technology up here, mobile phones. Anoush is the Director of Projects and Partnerships for mobileactive.org. You heard a lot about MobileActive actually in the last panel. In fact, Bob Boorstin mentioned their failure fairs. Their failure fairs are really sort of pioneering initiative in this town where people don't like to talk in public about projects that fail, but in fact, it is the absolute epitome of best practice learning, lessons learned. And MobileActive has been on the kind of cutting edge of trying to understand lessons learned from the innumerable mobile phone projects launched by your partner organizations around the world, helping to save us all from reinventing the wheel in various places. So that kind of public reflection is very rare, and that's why I love this organization, MobileActive. And I'm really excited to have Anoush here to give us your insights, Anoush, about the recommendation that was in the report, the task force report, that mobile phone-based citizen diplomacy programs should be developed to reach wider audiences. Seems a bit vanilla to me. Maybe you can talk a little bit, Anoush. First of all, it might be starters to give people an idea of what a mobile phone-based citizen diplomacy program is. And then what do you think of the recommendation? How should we be reaching wider audiences?
Sure. I thought I would start, as you mentioned, to kind of talk about what this might look like. First, by looking at what's happening out there in the world of mobile as far as interesting programs and projects, and extrapolating a little bit on what I think is possible that I don't see happening at the moment. But based on what is happening, it's not that far-fetched to think about potential future uses. And then also just touch briefly before the time is up on some of the barriers and why perhaps we haven't seen as much of an expansion in this space. My area of interest for where mobiles can be most useful in citizen diplomacy is in how these connected technologies can be used for expression and sharing information and expanding awareness and understanding between cultures. And I would say one thing to look first at is at some of the listen is really the most important thing. Listen to what's actually becoming popular organically on their own. So there's platforms around the world that are gaining popularity in different countries. There's a service called Bubbly in India, which is basically like Twitter, but audio-based. People call in, leave short messages, and then those messages can be shared, which seems maybe silly to us here, but there isn't a prevalent use of voicemail, for example. So to record audio and then share that is kind of a novelty, and it also overcomes kind of literacy issues. In South Africa, Mixit is an interesting platform that's a social network over mobile phones. People can chat with each other. You can create large chat groups. It's relatively inexpensive. And there's been innovations there where, for example, there are programs who have established HIV/AIDS anonymous kind of counseling chat rooms and groups. So you could think about, the next step of that. Perhaps you could think of, international professional networks, perhaps peer groups of other types, using those types of chat rooms to keep in touch and share ideas and exchange thoughts about a given topic that they find as a shared interest. Of course, Facebook and mobile go together very easily in many, many contexts. Not everywhere, but where people do have internet-enabled telephones, that's certainly growing. Mobile media, citizen media. I won't touch into that too far because I think everyone is aware of how prevalent the mobile phone and the camera phone and taking video over mobile has become in sharing experiences from around the world, and the increasing ability to smoothly get your video from your phone or your photos from your phone onto the web somehow and share them gives us access into people's everyday lives in corners of the world where we wouldn't otherwise know what the streets of streets in countries like Sri Lanka might look like, or streets in Iran during the protests, for example. I mean, at the very minimum, what this is providing is a look at what's happening in corners of the earth where we wouldn't otherwise have access, other than citizens kind of producing their own media and sharing it. Sharing information and news. In the last panel, Troy mentioned something called a IVR system, which is basically interactive voice. You've used it when you call a customer service line and they say, dial 1, press 1 for help on this, press 2 for help on this. There's many examples of news radio stations or newspapers or news companies using IVR as a way to deliver news. Dial 1 for local news, dial 2 for sports news. And you could see, again, I don't see it now, but an extrapolation of that could be a future, models like that to share international news or other bits of information, perhaps. Two other areas, advocacy and organizing, cause-related campaigns. Obviously, text fundraising has been an interesting topic for people to talk about. And after Haiti, there was of course, text donations that were raised by the Red Cross in staggering numbers, which isn't replicable in all cases, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And finally, there's a lot of action in where mobiles and international development can fit in, both with traditional actors like UNICEF and USAID figuring out ways to actually incorporate mobile into delivery of programs that can help improve lives, and also independent organizations and examples of programs like Sama Source, which are basically creating micro tasks, little jobs that can be sent to people around the world over SMS. Somebody can do something like do a short translation of something or correct a sentence and translate it into local jargon and get paid for that work. So there's interesting examples like that, but I don't want to conflate too much citizen diplomacy and development and charity because I think they're all different and they have different responsibilities in different contexts. But those things are happening.
We're going to come back to lots of questions, I'm sure, about mobile since it really cuts across virtually every platform here. I want to now move to Craig. Craig Newmark, Craig and Craigslist. So I've kept the last, I have to confess, I kept you to last, Craig, because it's the only way I knew my daughter who's watching a webcast was going to watch the whole time. Because if she knew that you were the last speaker. So it was a selfish reason. But the founder of one of the most successful online marketplaces in history, consider 3 stats I saw on your website. Craigslist gets more than 20 billion page views per month. It's the number 7 worldwide in terms of English language page views. And last but perhaps most incredibly to any of us in Washington who work in large bureaucracies is that the company is less than 40 full-time employees. Pretty amazing.
Thanks, and please thank your daughter for me, although she may be deluded if she's really watching to see me. My perspective is informed just by the fact that I really am a nerd. In the fullness of the cliche, I'm an engineer by training and fairly impatient, focusing on what's real and doing what I've been doing for 15 or 16 years. All I can see is that we provide a very simple classifieds model site, allowing people in the world to self-organize, to do things and organize from the grassroots, from the rank and file up. I see lots and lots of well-intentioned efforts which try to do something good, and they may have a good idea, but may not make anything happen. I only have confidence and faith in the ability of masses of people to work with each other to get things done on that basis. So what we do, it helps people out, is applicable in some senses, although we're mostly US-based, and my ignorance of much of the world is vast. I really don't know what's going on. But what I see working for people in the US and in the rest of the world is for people to work with each other and small groups, and then to self-organize, to build what some of the people call emergent systems, where if people stand up for each other, if they bear witness for each other, that's the kind of thing that can work. And that's why my focus in terms of what you might think of as online marketplaces are those newer sites where people of goodwill can help out each other, can bear witness for each other, and let each other know that they're doing good work and they're supportive of each other. Now, you can do some of that on Facebook and some of them on Twitter, and I actively use both of those for that kind of thing. And when we're done here, I'll be checking out Twitter to see what people are saying in response to this. And then to bear witness for other people's good work, I'll do a fair amount of retweeting. I should say that I do a lot of retweeting for that purpose, to bear witness for the things that other people are doing, to give them credit for what's going on. And I also do a lot of retweeting because this spares me from the burden of original thought. People wonder when I'm making a joke or being completely serious, and the answer is yes. However, I see two new efforts coming to, milestones within the next 2 weeks or so that might help us at doing this. In the U.S., there's something called greatnonprofits.org, which positions itself as a kind of Yelp for nonprofits, focusing on the notion that when you see something that's good and where people are actually good at getting things done, you can bear witness for it by just writing a positive review for it. They've been up and running for some time, but they're talking about a new version with better connection to Facebook and so on coming up shortly. And in the last couple days, I've written my first reviews anticipating the new version. That's greatnonprofits.org. The bigger effort is called Jumo.com, Jumo.com. The intent of that is social networking for nonprofits, working with and complementing bigger efforts like Facebook. And the intent there is that as an individual, you can bear witness for not only those other groups of people of goodwill who are getting things done, but you can also bear witness for the individuals who are doing good things about getting things done. And there I may actually ask people who I've been supporting in large numbers, because I'm supporting some tens of nonprofits. I think it's broken the 100 nonprofit organization point recently. I will stand up for those nonprofits who I think are doing a good job and getting things done in response for letting me know about that and then linking back to what I'm doing, because I'm going to be supporting other people's groups who are actually getting stuff done. Notice my bias there. As an impatient engineer and nerd, I may not have enough patience for groups with good intentions who aren't good at getting stuff done. More importantly, and as a customer service rep, I see a lot of things on the net happening where people are actually running nonprofits that are not only ineffective, but nonprofits which are actually running scams, because that's a problem in the U.S., and not a small problem. And the two groups I mentioned, Juma.com and greatnonprofits.org, will have some ability to point out where people are running nonprofits which are actually cover operations for unsavory activities. And that will play a role in this too. That complements some of the security stuff people are talking about in the prior panel. But for various historical reasons, I'm focused a lot on scam fighting. And so the deal is that in terms of online marketing places, Juma and Great Nonprofits, I think, will play an important role in connecting people of goodwill. I'm committed to doing this, and not just for now, but for the next 20 years or so. I figure I have at least 20 years left as I enter my declining years.
Great. Thank you. I didn't mention the specific recommendation that was in the task force report about online marketplace, and I just would like to get your reaction to it. The specific recommendation was create an online marketplace where people interested in participating in programs can search a program listed based on their interest, or can post what they are interested in doing, and groups that are looking for volunteers can find them. And the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy, our sponsor here today, the leading sponsor of the event, offers something like this already on its website, but their experience is the traffic, the participation simply isn't there. So my question to you is, do we need to create another online marketplace, or are you saying it's happening with the various ones that you're coming across?
I think we should start with what already exists and what already has some traction, and try to cultivate that from the bottom up. Again, I have a lot more faith on great numbers of people who are actually good at getting stuff done, connecting people who are good at getting stuff done, and building on that. On the volunteer side, and I didn't focus on that, but take a look in the U.S. what's happening on serve.gov, what's happening at allforgood.org, focusing on how people are learning how to, again, connect groups who need volunteer help and who are building that from the bottom up. I'm a little obsessed with this notion of building things from the bottom up because, especially for a man of my advanced years, I've seen many efforts which tend to start from positions of authority from the center, and what happens on the periphery from the bottom up, self-organizing systems seem to work better than systems from the top down.
Okay.
I'd like to think of another way of being funny, by the way.
I want to close the loop from the way the first panel kind of they were talking about security concerns. It's a bit of a bummer to go out that way because lots of enthusiasm around citizen diplomacy, but there was at least as much concern about security and risk in the previous panel. I want to close the loop here with you all before we throw it out to the floor and take questions. And that is the technology. We're here to talk about tools. The tools are agnostic. The tools can be used for good or they can be used for evil. And I just want to get your sense, given that last conversation that we had on the first panel, of how you think about the risks involved. For example, Lucas, you have conversations between young people in other countries, mediated conversations with young people in other countries. Presumably, when you have those conversations in the midst of something like the Gaza war, there's just as much potential for actually not generating positive goodwill towards citizens in another country. Where Michael, somebody can upload onto dotSUB, certainly, videos that are inflammatory. They can upload videos of drone strikes and ask for those to be translated. How do you think about ensuring that these tools that you all are on the cutting edge of creating are used to drive citizen diplomacy in the right direction and not used for other purposes? And we'll go right down here, and let me get your takes on that. Lucas?
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think for anyone who's been to the BBC website or any of the sort of online chat discussions, you're probably well aware that a lot of the conversation online does, in my opinion, do more harm than good. I mean, it often brings out the worst in us, and we get a very distorted view of the world, thinking that everyone's a racist and everyone has these incredibly radical, polarized views. And so I think, the way in which that communication takes place in terms of the environment, the tools we use, has a very important impact on the actual success of that interaction. For us, the goal really is higher than information exchange. I think information exchange, particularly when you can talk about it at the massive scale that the work that Michael's doing in terms of sharing videos and being able to see those, is incredibly powerful. Relationship formation is a higher bar. And look, we live in a country right now where there's pretty good communication. Everybody here speaks the same language, but anybody who's familiar with a couple groups in town called Republicans and Democrats is probably aware that speaking the same language doesn't necessarily mean that we communicate too well. So what enables that type of communication to cross those bridges, we believe relationships are key. If you can actually build a rich, deep understanding of that individual, that has transformative effect. So to tie it to your question, Sheldon, we really emphasize early on trying to form those personal relationships. Our program involves 10 weeks of 2-hour discussions in groups of 8 individuals. It's facilitated in which people are seeing and hearing each other, and they're all talking in English. And it's one point I'd like to talk to. But you enable people to not just think of, this is a random perspective from some Arab. This is Ahmed. This is Ahmed, the guy who had that story about his uncle whose friend lost that. It's a human. If you can humanize that conversation, it's radically different. And I think that goes a long way to lessening the volume and the temperature on these conversations. You have that foundation of respect, and that enables for a much more constructive exchange between people. That's really at the heart of the matter for us. Now, just one brief deviation, if I could, to talk about language. I completely agree with you in terms of the importance of demonstrating respect and how we communicate. And I am closely monitoring the work that you do, Global Voices does, Medan. It's incredibly important. I'm a bit wary of getting into some sort of, competition between, 2 different very important lines of work. As you said, there are 2 billion people who are learning English right now. Not all of them get along very well. And if you look at the profile of people who are having an influence on these societies, even those who are resorting to violence against us, those 19 guys who got on planes on September 11th, they spoke English pretty well. So there is a huge pool of people out there who speak English that we need to be talking to. And so I think there's a little bit of making perfect the enemy of good if we limit ourselves to only speaking in other languages. I think it's really important, but it shouldn't compromise efforts to do communication, deep relationship formation at as big a scale as we can within the demographics that do speak English today.
It's a great question, and I'd like to start off by saying there's a difference between the cutting edge and the bleeding edge. And what we've been doing is at the bleeding edge, and by the definition of bleeding edge, you get bloody, and you make mistakes. So when people start doing something new and have a brand new technology, there is no proven business model. And for example, much of the innovation in technology and digital technology is coming out of the porn industry, because they're cutting edge people that know how to use the tool to serve a market. One of the other things that I've noticed here, I know only 3 or 4 people in this entire conference, is most of the people here are with nonprofits. And a lot of the innovation comes out of people that are working in the for-profit world. And much of the use of dotSUB is in the nonprofit world. So I think it's very, very important to realize that when you create a new tool, I don't think it's possible to prevent bad and good uses to happen. The tool is made to solve a human problem. And all great companies are solving big problems. So when you create a tool in whatever it is, from technology to create an online marketplace, translation, either machine translation, that tool has to be exposed to people to use it. And when it's open for people who want to solve problems, some of those people are going to want to do good, and some of those people are going to want to do bad. And I don't know how, without, by leaving the open community exposes everything to both. And someone on the earlier panel made that comment. a lot of what we do has risks of the translation not being accurate. And people have the choice to make, is it better than nothing, and how do you want... So these are all risks, and I don't know how you, get rid of those risks when you're fostering innovation.
Anoush, you're talking about a risk of a different kind, sort of. They alluded to the proprietary government ownership of the information, and I will say that we work with a lot of activists and people in conflict zones who are aware that their SMS text messages are not private, and they do get them in big trouble, in jail and otherwise. How do you Mobile Active advise folks on this?
Certainly, as far as risks or barriers or challenges go, the security one is top of mind for us at Mobile Active, and looking at how people are using their mobile phones around the world. It's expanding, so there's huge opportunity there. I'm surprised that the figure hasn't been thrown around, but everybody loves to just point out that there's now over 5 billion mobile phone subscriptions around the world. So we were talking about really high levels of penetration, and everyone has one in their hands. But mobile phones are different than other technologies, and they're fully commercial. They're, as we mentioned in the previous panel, a lot of times the telecoms are either used to be or are government-related or monopolies. The data is really insecure. I mean, both the data is insecure and the tool is insecure. I mean, once you've lost a phone, you've lost all your contacts, all the people that you keep in touch with, putting those people at risk, perhaps if you're working in a repressive environment. And so very much I would just echo what was mentioned in the first panel, that discussion there about understanding the risks and explaining them to people so they're aware of what their risks are before they enter into using the mobile phone for even things that seem innocuous. But you've heard the example of in Azerbaijan where people were texting to vote for an Armenian singer in Eurovision. It's the singing, it's like the equivalent of American Idol, being called in for questioning by the government. So things that seem innocuous could even become problematic. So understanding the risks and also working on developing some basic and easy-to-use tools. We're working on a project right now on that to kind of help come up with and work on what's being done and help people understand better what kind of tools you can, software you can add to your phone, or just aware of what you can do to make yourself more secure. And in general, not around the data and the actual technology, but just in general around mobiles. One of the risks, of course, is wasting people's time, money. And so I think learning from failed projects, as you mentioned, fail-fair, is an interesting thing to think about what's been done. The state landscape is littered with projects that kind of went nowhere or were kind of wasteful or not helpful, and to learn from those and not reinvent the wheel and not, waste extra resources and time and money on things that are not going to be that useful for people. And of course, just thinking about what's appropriate. As Ian said, I think in the previous panel, the first question is this technology appropriate? So if you haven't asked that question, then there's no need to kind of move past that.
Long subject, actually. And just to focus on the practical aspects of security, especially for dissidents and so on across the world, including the U.S., take a look at Global Voices Online and also the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org, because there you can get practical advice on ways that you can protect yourself. Because remember that everything you're doing online, and online includes cell phones now, that's on the record, possibly forever. Also, when it comes to mobile devices and so on, in many cases it's possible for people to track you on those devices. That's just part of modern life right now. And there's a lot of help online for those kind of situations. But bear in mind, too, that some of the traditional threats to your security that have always been around are still there. For example, online, if let's suppose you're running a successful operation and you're getting a lot of traction, there are people who may decide that they can take advantage of that by, for example, saying things in your name online. And the way things spread on the net, something said in your name, good or bad, will spread very quickly. And there currently are no defenses against that, except for other people to stick up for you and to say what's actually right. I did that in a very, very minor way for a friend last night on Twitter. So those kind of threats, those kind of disinformation attacks, those kind of scams, which have always been possible in information networks prior to the internet, are on the internet now and in far worse ways. You may be doing something that really helps people out. You may be helping people in dire circumstances. You may be running effective operations which help dissidents or which attack criminal operations. And yet, if there are some people out there who may find profit in then attacking your efforts, that kind of thing is happening, happens now, and the only way we're going to survive all that until we evolve better technology is for people of goodwill to stand up for each other, to help each other out. And those are the kind of mechanisms that I'm trying to support and see what happens. So again, there's new threats to our security, mediated by the internet, including mobile phones. But there's also old kinds of threats which have been around for a long time. Those are still there. Those are going to force us to help each other out. And, helping each other out, that's a pretty good thing.
I think we're going to go to the floor now, but that's a really great comment in which to kind of summarize what we've been hearing here, which is to say that across this panel, right, virtual exchanges, video conferencing, mobile platforms, and online marketplaces, we really do have the means today to amplify the voices of people who want to reach out and build bridges. It does exist. The translation softwares even exist, flawed though they are. They exist in asynchronous ways, and they're pretty darn good. If we want to tweet in another language, you actually can tweet in another language. So I guess the power to amplify is really there. So let me now turn to this very patient audience and take any questions. If you will stand up, identify yourself, and we'll take questions. Go ahead. Sure.
My name is Moderator from the Robert Sterling Park Foundation. We have been trying for several years now to develop some kind of an online device that will permit artists to communicate with artists, and artists to communicate with venues, and venues to communicate with venues across borders with a translation function, so that artists would have the power to, engage and do their own gigs. They could contact a presenter directly. Now, I'm interested in Mr. Craigslist. Is this possible? I mean, does the technology now exist to do this?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask, since I was interested in natural language translation 40 years ago, and it's advanced somewhat since then. Google's target is to be able to provide translation from one language to the other, and they're pretty confident it's doable, but I have a feeling other folks on the panel know the state of the art a lot better than I do. I'm looking over here right now.
What you want to do is not really difficult from a technology point of view, and you could get that done relatively quickly and easily with tools that exist. So I'd be very glad to talk to you afterwards about that. But I don't think there's lots of examples of people that do something similar.
Thank you.
Okay, right here, and we'll go back there. Oh, come up and take the microphone.
Please. Hello, my name is Paige Hall. I am actually a student delegate from the Livermore Global Scholars Program at Adelphi University. I have been researching some of the things that have been mentioned here today, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is that the ability to text through the use of cellular phones has been recently used in diplomatic efforts throughout the world and is a very innovative diplomatic tool. In researching this new wave of digital diplomacy, I focus mostly on the issues in the Democratic Republic of the Congo right now. Within the DRC, texting is being used to address and potentially alleviate some of the great humanitarian issues throughout the nation. These texting efforts include sending notification to women and young girls when soldier populations are nearby. This allows them to avoid and ultimately protect themselves from rape and sexual violence. Texting is also being used in the country to notify armed soldiers of rehabilitation opportunities, peace efforts, and to encourage them to demobilize and retreat from the country's vast jungles. A mobile banking system has also been created to ensure that soldiers of the Congolese government are rightfully getting the compensation and payment that they deserve. All of these texting-based projects are great in their efforts to alleviate these issues. However, the use of texting as a short-term solution in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is actually quite problematic, and I discovered an interesting paradox. In order to text, people need cell phones, and the production of cell phones is often overlooked. Cell phones are produced with conflict materials like tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold. All of these valuable commodities are mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and have caused many rebel groups to use terroristic violence as a means of gaining financial control over these profitable minerals. With this, I'd like to pose a question to the panel. By using texting through the use of cellular phones as diplomatic tools, I believe we're ignoring the deeper systematic problems that cell phone demands cause in nations like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So with this, how does expanding the use of cellular diplomacy to reach audiences worldwide take into consideration that an increase in demand for electronic technology that causes violent long-term sustainability issues in conflict areas like this come into play with what we're talking about today? Thank you.
Okay, well, it's a very good question. I mean, it's not as though these aren't without implications, the natural resource implications of this technology. So,
if I want to take a crack at that very challenging question, once again, when one develops new technology, one uses the material and tools that are available. The market decides whether products and services are acceptable, and as it goes, if the use of certain types of materials is going against the market, ultimately people will find other materials to use. But I think that, you know, all of this is part of a free market, open society, is that, you know, things are found, products are developed, and at the end of the day, the more complex a society is, the more that you can dig very deep and find things that are objectionable up and down the supply chain, child labor in factories, et cetera. And there's mechanisms for protest around the world at work. But I don't think that one should stop technological advances and benefits because of this, but it's very good to be aware of. I don't really know how to answer the question any other way.
I'm not sure how to answer the question either, but I would just, at least in two pieces, just my thoughts. Not specific to the Congo, but just first your bigger question. Certainly using these technologies and some of the applications that can be done to alleviate certain solutions are not the answer for a lot of things, of course. If you implement a program where you can SMS and map incidences of domestic violence or something, that's a great tool to help, perhaps law enforcement or perhaps women from avoiding certain areas or certain, information that can be useful, but that's not solving the problem of domestic violence, just as a side example. So certainly I think that with all of these technologies where we're thinking of solutions, they're not always addressing the root problem. The root problem of where certain technologies come from and the hardware that's being used, I think is a bigger question I don't feel I can answer, but I know that there is a large debate about that and the idea, the research behind this argument about the conflict minerals and where they play a role. And I think that the information is varied. I don't feel comfortable explaining it, but I know that there is a lot of debate about that, and I think it's worth looking into.
I'd direct you to the World Bank as well. They're working a great deal on this very subject.
I think there's questions there about the research.
Okay.
This is a new problem that I've never heard before, but the specifics, if I understood it right, and I'm trying to read someone to see if I can't, is that in a lot of electronics, there are some metals with some relative scarcity which are used, sometimes rare earths, sometimes just gold and stuff like that. And I have a feeling, and I'm trying to think like an engineer here, the problem is they're not only used, but they're used in increasing amounts and not recycled properly. Because one thing about those metals is that they can be recycled if you can get them and then reuse them. So the next step for this might be a call for specifically for electronic manufacturers to build the devices such that it's fairly easy for the specific metals to be recycled relatively easily without other environmental impacts. Because I do know that a lot of U.S. electronics refuse is sent overseas where people burn off a lot of the residual stuff in order to get at recyclable metals, creating other problems in turn. So the specific suggestion would be for the people who care to specifically call for electronics manufacturers to build a gadgetry such that the scarcest metals can be recycled easily, let's say by if someone's grabbing the gadget that's about to be discarded, the rare earth metals or whatever can be snapped off and then recycled in a relatively painless way. Not a great suggestion, but it's the best I could do right now.
Just to sort of get back to the subject of the panel a bit, there's two of the four panelists. One is talking about mobile delivery of citizen diplomacy, and I'm talking about translation. So we have a tool to enable video to be viewed in 45 languages, for example, from an iPhone with a scrolling menu, and this is Sir Ken Robinson, the British educator. So as these kinds of uses of tools in diplomacy, and as you can have more communication devices, you'll be able to communicate using all of the tools, which is, I think, the whole purpose of this discussion, as to how do you implement new digital media tools in order to facilitate an increase in citizen diplomacy.
One back there, I promised. Yeah, you had your hand up?
Yeah. I'd like to speak to Lucas's point.
Can you identify yourself? And
Mark Novak, San Jose State University. And I'd like to talk about the Soliya program and just make a comment and support this. And also something you said, Sheldon. And that is that we had one Soliya program, it was between us and Egypt. And that spawned two more, not Soliya in this case, to Spain and to Dubai. And this year we have 16 professors that want to do, we call it virtually abroad. There's not all of our students who go there. And I don't see, your point, I don't see why we couldn't have every single professor saying, this is a great thing for me to do, it makes my courses easier. But if they don't pick it up right away, if anybody wants to know how we're doing this, there are some tricks to the trade that you really have to encourage people and incentivize them. But once they get going, it's a fabulous idea, and your program seeded that for us, so thank you.
Thanks very
much. There you go. Yes, you had your hand up.
I'm Natasha from the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa, and I'm curious about, we know about Soliya as well, but I'm curious about, Mr. Smolens, I'm curious about the relationship between spoken and written language and how much of the adjustability, how much translation software, how quickly we can adjust, especially how we deal with the problem of nation languages versus dialect versus idiolects, so that the translation software actually approximates, even if asymptotically, the actual speaking condition, and that would be very much closer to the question of classroom interaction that would be made possible. But you would actually be able to recognize spoken language as it's used in practice rather than only in its ideal form.
Just to be clear, we don't have automated technology. Other people like Google and lots of other people develop, so we integrate with Google Translate or other things. So as the tools are available to better understand dialects, and you need multi-million language and phrase pairs between languages in order to begin to have corpus to create machine translation, it will get better. The difference between voice and text is a very important issue, and there's a lot of text-to-voice technology that can read text in a language and then repeat it with the robotic type of sound that you're used to hearing. And it's the difference between subtitling and dubbing. And if you have media, generally you need a male and a female voice and maybe a boy's and a girl's voice, and everyone on a computer or a keyboard has a keyboard to type, but most people don't have microphones. So there are significant technology challenges to to go from text to voice, but it is all part of the evolutionary and technology roadmap of doing all of this.
One comment on that too, and this just builds on the question of sort of the effectiveness of the machine translation, and I do think that, you know, again, the work that Michael's doing and these other organizations, in 20 years, I mean, I don't know how long, maybe in 20 years it will definitely be a game changer in the way the world communicates, and I think it'll have profound significance. In the interim, and even with that technology, I think, you know, it's important for us to recognize there's a reason all of you are here as opposed to deciding to read the transcript after. You know, we communicate so much through, you know, the tone of our voice, the facial expressions we have, and with our particular aim, you know, where we see relationships as being a really fundamental way of how you affect, I mean, that's what diplomacy is in large part. We think that, you know, those other forms of communications are really powerful and often not understood enough. And I tell you, when you see, you know, a kid from Egypt, you know, laugh and smile, you know, that does so much to that kid from Iowa, you know, much more than him saying something that he hadn't understood before. And so, anyway, I think that's one of the important things we recognize in this new media space, that a lot of the advances are enabling more than they used to, is that we can have that rich human experience. It's not the same as maybe sharing a meal, but you can tell when someone's a little bit nervous, you can tell when someone's, you know, enjoying themselves. And that type of communication isn't about language. It's about being a human. And that's what really enables us all to sort of have that shared sense of commonality, which we think is really important.
Listening to all of you talk, it's been really interesting, and I thought a bit about your success with Craigslist. It seems like the best and most effective systems and services play to an innate human problem or need, you know, with the buying, selling, services, advertisements. Some of the things Anoush mentioned, Mix-It and Bubbly, that are sort of just facilitating natural social bonds. I wonder, in the sense that sort of a need for U.S. ideas or engagement is not necessarily something that's organic and out there among a lot of the target populations, how can we sort of look for more of these organic user needs, if you want to put it that way, and try to develop diplomacy systems that go towards those so that perhaps we reach a wider scale than the things where we have to seed them because we want to put our ideas out there?
I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, so I only know one small part of the answer just in terms of connecting people, in terms of real need and observation, and that's microfinance. For example, I've working with Kiva and CHF International, I'm doing my own microfinance, my very small microfinance efforts on the West Bank in Palestine, figuring that there's a lot of people running businesses out of their home, particularly women. And there, in fact, I've been remiss. Maybe I need to find out more about Soliya or other groups, because I've actually been remiss in terms of maintaining my efforts. Microfinance is one way to get real about doing things in that sense. It's not the only way that you can help out in areas like that. There's also direct contributions through reconstruction agencies. Somewhere on the West Bank, there's a latrine with my name on it. I guess I figured that's something that no one else would fund. But those small efforts in terms of real things, that's one area which actually works and gets some stuff done.
There's a technology that people don't think about, the technology based on what Lucas said in your question. Most of you probably are aware of meetup.org. Meetup is facilitating 2 million meetings, 200,000 meetings a month around the world. And people are connecting with a new digital tool, and they make it so easy. And the largest meetup subject is motherhood. There are more meetings every month about motherhood around the world than any other subject. So when citizen diplomats are going into an area and they want to discuss any subject, whether it be gender, whether it be the environment, they could call for meetups for people to be connecting and actually get together in local communities to discuss areas of common interest, because that's what Scott came up with the idea of Meetup, is that people need to be together. So he's using technology, very much like Craig is, to bring people together in a physical space to talk about a common subject. So that might be the use of technology to facilitate diplomacy on a local level.
Craig, can I just follow up from your point with a follow-up question to you? You are, as Michael said, connecting people to do online commerce. What are you learning about relationships that flow from that, or online disputes that flow from that? I know it's a huge issue at eBay, online dispute resolution. And
since there's people asking with questions, here's the very short version. People overall are very trustworthy and very good. There are bad guys out there, not many of them. They do make a lot of noise, and they try to get themselves a lot of mind share in our heads, because they are out there, and you do got to watch out for them. But the idea is that you provide a means to connect for people to work with each other, to connect with each other, and then you get out of the way, and that way at least you can avoid being a problem. Centralized online dispute resolution, I don't know if it's working that well.
Do you have any sense of relationships that flow from the commerce itself?
I hear anecdotally in large numbers that people actually wind up making friends that way. They get along that way. In the past, I've heard that roommate ads, where people, particularly men, describe themselves honestly, are actually not bad for dating. Because, generally speaking, a human male describing himself will do so more honestly in a roommate ad than in a dating ad. or so I hear.
You heard it here first, folks. Okay. Back in the corner.
Mark Redstock, and I'm with the National Council for International Visitors, which is celebrating 50 years of promoting citizen diplomacy, and I guess that might make us one of the more traditional citizen exchange type programs. And a lament I hear often among our members and of other organizations is that what we do in Indianapolis and Rochester and around the country is operating below the radar of people's consciousness, and not enough people know about us. Sheldon, you just summarized to say that the power to amplify what we're doing is there. And I guess my question to the panel is, what are traditional organizations doing wrong that is causing them to not get how to do that effectively?
This has nothing to do with mobiles, but since I was writing the report together with this roundtable, we did talk about a little bit of this quite a bit when we were thinking about it. Something I think that traditional citizen diplomacy organizations, especially ones like the one you described where they're kind of professional exchanges, I think could really capitalize on online platforms to allow those participants to continue keeping in touch. I mean, obviously, a lot of organizations have already thought about alumni networks or groups online to allow alum to keep talking. But one of the most powerful things that we spent a few pages in the report talking about is professional peer networks. So the same way you've got traditional, like offline, engineering trade associations across countries, or practitioners of a certain type of medicine that all know each other across the globe because they practice something that's very specific and they're the experts in that topic. Similarly, I think that those kinds of relationships that perhaps happen offline or through exchange programs could continue and be facilitated online. We talk in the report about how the tech community has totally capitalized on this. There's Google groups everywhere for every certain type of topic. So people who are interested in crisis mapping or people who are interested in mobiles, for example. We have a very large global network of people who just are interested in this work and do this work, and they keep in touch regularly. And that's this type of citizen diplomacy that's totally off the radar, but it's helping those professionals in different countries learn from each other and share knowledge. So I think that, especially for exchange type programs or professional bond building organizations, to think about the online component to keep those discussions and that knowledge sharing door open to let people continue.
I just have one thought on that too. I think the shift we're going through in terms of the media space, it's broadly speaking from, let's say, a broadcast era to more of a social media era. in the broadcast era, it was about finding the biggest megaphone and getting your message to that megaphone so it could get out. And now in the social media space, it's more akin to community organizing than it is to finding that central broadcaster. And so with the 50 years of work that your organization has, I would assume you have a really broad constituent base. And they're your greatest asset in this context. And I think the goal would be to empower your constituents with these new media tools to, whether it's as simple as updating their Facebook status or, using Twitter. I mean, it depends on who you're trying to reach exactly. But I think that the shift in mindset, it's not about reaching the broadcasters. It's about empowering your base to be your broadcasters.
Anybody else want to add anything to that? All right, we are coming up on the end of our time here. In fact, we're beyond our time, and I know we promised 2 students here who are visiting to make sure we made time for you both to get your questions. Do you want to ask your question?
It's more contributing to the discussion, so
Sure.
Thank you for making time for me. I really appreciate it. My name is Rebecca Benison. I'm a senior from Adelphi University. I'm a journalism major, environmental studies minor, and I'm going to talk about the role of ebooks in advancing citizen diplomacy from an environmental standpoint. It's a topic that seems overlooked in the field of new media technology, so I just wanted to make sure that it did get discussed in this forum. So, the difference between ebooks and e-readers, first of all, it's important to understand. Ebooks are basically the publications that you would read on pretty much any device electronically. So your laptop, desktop, computer, your mobile phone, anything that has that kind of capability, whereas the e-reader is a device that was specifically designed to allow you to read on it in an easier format. So in 2008, it was estimated that 125 million, trees were cut down to be used in the production of books and newspapers. So just hearing that statistic, it would seem to make a great case for implementing more e-readers, more e-books, to try to cut down on that consumption. Unfortunately, what we don't know is the materials that are going into these e-readers themselves. We don't know what sort of minerals, chemicals are going into or coming out of them. There's no transparency from the manufacturers letting us know what sort of implications this could have for the environment. So while we know that books are being made from trees, which are a renewable resource, we don't know what's going on with these e-readers. Aside from that, the issue of where they're being produced is also a topic of concern. Amazon's Kindle is produced by a company in China called Foxconn. It's the same company that also produces a lot of Apple's computers, the iPhone, etc. And they're actually a coal-burning facility. So you have these e-readers that are cutting down on tree consumption that are actually contributing to the carbon emissions being let into the environment as well. So that's also a problem. And there is currently no permanent recycling program for any e-readers. There is a temporary one offered by Sony in which they will buy back any e-reader and give you a credit toward the purchase of any another e-reader from their company. This is only until January, however, and it also contributes to the amount of waste that we have produced, since basically it's just contributing to the society of keeping up, buying the next newest model of everything. So what can we do? We need sustainability. So my questions for the panel were basically, how can we implement a recycling program? Would this come from the nonprofit sector? Would this come from manufacturers? What realistic options do you think we have available for this? Who should get involved? And then a more technical question, I don't know if anyone really has the answer to this right now, is how can we create a better ebook? LG is currently considering a solar model. However, it would take 4.5 hours of direct sunlight to charge it for a day. So unless you're on the beach reading all day, you're not going to really have that option. So I was actually thinking that maybe we could have a kinetic energy model similar to kinetic watches, where your own movement, you're walking, lugging it in your backpack, would actually power the device. So I was just wondering if anybody here would know if there was a realistic application for this. What else can we do to promote sustainability?
Very good. Those are really, really good questions to end on. And I actually think that what you've done is surface this, where we are as in our ability, the new ability to crowdsource solutions. So the answer to these extremely vexing questions that you've posed, and I'm going to let the panel take on anything that any suggestions they have in terms of recycling or build a better ebook. But it's really clear that those vexing questions need the wisdom of crowds in order to help solve them, and that's what this technology is all about. So anybody on the panel wants to speak to online recycling programs? I see, Craig, you're willing to jump in here?
Reuse is better than recycling, but even the reused gear is going to wind up in the trash heap someday. So the deal is, instead of getting dedicated ebook readers, get a tablet, which can also do things like email or web browsing. Right now, the best solution is the iPad, but that will be different in a few months. This is a tough one for me, since I love to read and read about a book a week. So the deal is, I just want one gadget to bring along. And then beyond that, computer manufacturers are working on construction designs such that the materials are recyclable in some form. Regarding alternate power abilities, it looks like the best way to do that is, if you do have ideas, like the idea of converting body kinetic motion into electricity, the people who do that kind of innovative stuff are folks like at the MIT Media Lab and so on. The deal is to be able to power devices through that or through hand cranks and so on. The idea is that they have the technological ability there, and they have the media mind share to get stuff across, which are part of the solution.
Anybody else? Any thoughts on this?
I just have one comment. I mean, first of all, I think it's very inspiring to see the commitment to a sustainable planet, which is something that it's good to see the next generations taking that into account, at least. And I do think that one of the important undercurrents of this conversation to me is we're not just talking about political divisions and conflict. We're talking about, no matter what the challenge is for the next generation, we as a planet need to be able to communicate more effectively. The environmental challenges, as the forum in Denmark showed, we need to be able to communicate more effectively. We need leaders who have the skills to communicate across cultural barriers to find a creative solution to these common problems. And I do think that new technologies have a really critical role to play in that. I mean, it's important. If we assume, as a given, we need to communicate more and better across this planet, I think it's important that we compare the activities that we're doing, not to not doing them, but compare having a dialogue online versus flying across the planet, where you end up doing a lot more damage to the planet. So I think there's a lot of advantages to this online communication for enabling much more efficient communication for environmentally as well, not just in terms of cost.
A very quick answer is what I answered before, is let the marketplace decide. Social activism. I mean, the best example in the last 30 days is the Gap. The Gap spent a lot of money redesigning a logo, and then they launched it, and the marketplace was so turned off with the logo that Gap pulled it because there was social activism on the point of their customers. So if you and enough of your friends got up and protested and tweeted and blogged about this issue, and it gets in the New York Times and on Huffington Post, you would start having people do something. So that's the marketplace is a very powerful tool.
So a lot of excitement about where we've come, and a lot of challenges ahead of us in synchronous translation, in building the relationships that make for sustainable, for good online virtual exchanges, in the security aspects. I am just reminded very quickly of an old story about Winston Churchill, who was on the speaking tour, and he goes into this church, and this little old lady comes up to him, and he was known for the amount of drink that he would put down. And she comes up to him and says, "Mr. Churchill, it is said that you have consumed enough alcohol to fill this church up to here. What do you intend to do about it?" And Churchill just looks at her, and lets his eyes slowly gaze from her hand up to the rafters of this church and says, "So little time, so much more to do." So little time, so much more to do in these areas. But as you've heard from some of these cutting-edge pioneers in the technology space, we've made huge strides in the last decade, really. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for being such a great audience.
I'm in New York.
As I give you a break.
My wife works on 64th between 2nd and 3rd, so I live on